First of all, thanks everybody for joining this call. We're very excited to be able to spend an hour talking about the key elements of raising capital. Where does it all begin and where does it all end? I'm lucky enough to be joined by a very kind of esteemed panel from our partners at PeakSpan, together with a couple of big startups, scale-ups as well. So we've got Jack Freeman and Jackson Enright from the team, and then Alvaro, Verdoy. I know always butcher your name, and we're going to also expect to see Stefan Dent here as well in a couple of minutes as well. We've got, as I say, about an hour. We're going to try and make this session as interactive as possible by sharing some information with you and then breaking into panel as well. And as we do that as well, we're going to take questions from those of you on the call here, and just do that by just dropping into the kind of the comments, and we'll look to answer those questions either through the panels or in the wrap up at the end as well. We will be recording the whole session as well, so if you do miss anything through a bathroom break or something similar, then that's okay. We'll be able to share the recording with you, as well as being able to share you links through to a white paper which supports what we're going to be talking about today. So with that, and with the arrival of Stefan Dent, perfect as always, we'll basically jump into the next agenda slide here as well. So first of all, we're going to cover the procurement technology market, how it's evolving and how it's evolved over the last couple of years. And then we'll move quite quickly into talking about how do you target the right investor and what do investors look for. Then we'll move to another section about creating the pitch and how you position yourself from a procurement perspective. And then finally into raising capital and the importance of basically building and managing the right relationships as well. So with that, I'll dive in and start off with a couple of trends that we're seeing as well across the market. All of you will know that over the last 5 years, we've seen a radical introduction of new innovation to the procurement space. That's enabled a lot of new digital solutions to move in, as well as basically new solutions being delivered by some of the bigger players as well, but fundamentally addressing new capabilities and then also new categories as well. So the demand and supply of digital solutions is in balance, and we're seeing this evolution and creation of a basic ecosystem of solutions as well. What's important as well is this kind of blend and understanding of how the interface blends right the way through into your database. And obviously no conversation would be complete without a conversation about AI and the impact of Gen AI as well. We're also seeing, as you can see from the stats on the right-hand side, that basically, whilst CPOs are embracing digitalization, they're also seeing some level of challenge, both challenge in terms of the pace of adoption, but also challenge in terms of basically the current economic climate as well. And we'll touch upon that a little bit through the eye of an investor as we go forward over the next couple of slides here. So I'd just like to pass over to Jack here, who's going to talk a little bit about how you go about targeting the right investor, and then we're going to talk a little bit about what that means for ProcureTech in particular as well.
Absolutely. Thanks for organizing, Lance, and pleasure to meet everyone virtually. On this slide, I'd drive home a couple of key points. I would say first, certainly in ProcureTech, but also in any sector, I think the earlier that you are in your trajectory, at the very early end, you're going to want people who believe in you. So like friends and family type round, yourself bootstrapping the business. It's really just about people that you're closest with and that align most with kind of what you're building. As you get a little further down, like a little more traction, I'd say industry specific investors are your best bet. So you're going to be pre-go-to-market traction. Metrics might not be exciting to you or a new investor or anyone. You're going to want people that are in the industry. So these can be individuals that were at Ariba for a long time and want to start making angel investments, or these could be procurement professionals who've been in the industry for a long time. These can be consultants, but I'd say in this like pre-revenue, and you can even see on the right, we list it in that 1 million and even 1 to 5. Industry specific investors are key. In ProcureTech, I think there are probably a handful of earlier stage investors that are institutional VCs that really target procurement technology. It's not a lot.
Yeah.
And so as you get to like bigger seed and angel rounds, like you want to raise 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 million, that type of investor is rare, and thus you want to try to go more kind of strategic capital, more familiar with ProcureTech capital, until you get to that bigger scale. Sometimes like 3 million is the bar, sometimes 5. Certainly when you're at like 5 or 10, and now I'm kind of segueing into the bottom ranks, you can start to go to the earlier growth equity segment and the true VC segment who sees your market opportunity. Everyone knows procurement and supply chain broadly, so they can kind of get familiar with what you're building pretty quickly, but then can rely on your metrics to get the investment passed through their investment committee. And so the more metrics, the more proof points, the more scale that you have, the more you'll be able to expand your pool of potential investors from, again, the industry. So it starts with friends and family, then moves on to kind of industry and strategic capital, who's going to really believe in what you're doing, irrespective of your revenues. And then as you can get those revenues and get those traction and proof points, you can access the broader VC and growth equity universe. So that's on the right side. It's certainly targeting the right investor, unless anyone on the call had any questions or things to add. Sticking with the fund part, I would look at the fund size. So if you are looking for a $5 million check and you're contacting someone with $1 billion fund, unless they are, have a history of writing very small checks into zillions of companies, it's probably not worth their time or worth the fit. So look at fund size, try to find what investments they've done and what sizes those are, and make sure that what you want aligns with what they offer is just, I think, really key. I think credibility and thesis is going to be important, especially on that lower ranks of the page. And so I'll call out Simfoni, who I know, one of their qualifiers for picking an investor for their Series A was if you knew who Coupa was. And if you didn't know who Coupa was, you weren't getting a call with the chairman and founder. So I think credibility is important. Like, make sure the investor knows what procurement is, who the players are, what the categories are. And then that next qualifier, especially if you're a high caliber company, is to make sure the investor has a thesis. One interesting thing you can do, and then I'll stop and we can move on to other slides, is let the investor speak first and say, hey, Mr. or Mrs. Investor, what is your thesis for my business? Would love to hear that. And you'll hear a wide spectrum of answers. There could be the transparent person that says, I don't have a thesis, I don't know your business. There could be someone who actually does have a thesis, and then in between you'll hear a whole lot of hand waving and nonsensical speaking. And so I'd put your prospective investors on the spot and ask what they know and why they like the business before anything else. So I'll pause there.
We analyze over 4,000 different solutions, and who's investing where. And Jack, you're spot on with that analogy that there's a lot of investors that have maybe got one investment into ProcureTech, so it's very flat, and there's only a few organizations that have basically invested on multiple occasions into ProcureTech solutions. So it is a a very targeted activity you need to do. I think one of the things which is interesting to see, and I'll pass over to Jackson on this, is when Jackson basically said, I tell you what, I wouldn't mind doing a bit of analysis of the ProcureTech 100. So for those of you every year we look at the 4,000 odd different solutions that are in this space, and we analyze them bottoms up, and then basically on top of that, basically get 60 odd procurement leaders to review the different solutions to identify qualitatively why they should be in the top 100. And that creates the 100. There's the 100 here, but a very different way of looking at them. So Jackson, and appreciate your thoughts on this, to the maturity of the sector and some of the players that we've got in here.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it was a great excuse to dive through the list and perform some of our own analysis here. But I think you can see it here. So we basically arranged the overall map of 100 logos by a few different funding ranges. And what I think the biggest takeaway here is just that there's a different sort of like clumping of the logos depending on what you're looking at. And this is something we'll talk about in the presentation, is that sometimes you can be a bootstrap company and still reach the $20 million outcome. Sometimes you can raise 20 million upfront and have 1 million in ARR. So there's some companies that, are scaled past 100, 150 employees that never raise more than 50 million or so. And on the other end, sometimes based on your competitive dynamics or just like sector intensity, you might want to raise more upfront to get to that next stage in your scale up journey. So yeah, I think the biggest takeaway here is that there's just, different ways to kind of scaling your business. Some of these companies are competitors and they're kind of like, competing head and head, raising the same amount of capital at the same time to get to where they are today. But there's a lot of different companies in the procurement sector that are kind of just, going along the same journey that we're going to be talking about today. They're raising capital, they're at their bootstrap phase, their Series A phase. Some of them are, the big incumbents, the Coupas that we're talking about that are, past 100 million raised. But yeah, that's the overview.
Yeah, I'd agree with you. I mean, the pathway is different. I mean, you look at organizations like Cievo, bootstrapped for 10, 15 years before they stepped into kind of a big investment, and others going the more traditional route. But yeah, great to see this analysis and the 100 shown like this as well. So again, just passing back to you, Jack. Basically, what do investors look for, and they're looking for a company to invest in?
So this might be later on in the presentation at some point, but one interesting thing to look at if you were to study this map is the logos on the right. If you're saying funding is indicative of success, and in this presentation, which is about raising funding, that is the definition of success, I suppose. These companies on the right touch some broader, bigger markets than just if you were selling a sourcing solution to the office of the CPO, and you had a price point of 50K, 100K, even 150K, and you're targeting like certain segments. Like the market size is definitely big, but to raise over $100 million, you need to support probably $1 billion, if not like at least, probably $1 billion outcome, if not like $500,000, between $500,000 and $1 billion, $500 million and $1 billion. So point being, if you're looking to raise that much capital or looking to take a really big swing, which you don't always have to, but if you are looking to do that, companies like Airbase, Flexport, obviously Coupa, C2FO, Syrian Labs, UiPath, like these are on the ProcureTech 100, but they also kind of transcend procurement a little bit. And I would say that's something that we've really seen is, procurement is not a siloed thing by definition. It touches sales, it touches procurement, it touches finance, it can touch every single purchaser in the organization, and it also touches payments. So if you start to loop in the fact that B2B payments is a $300 trillion opportunity, and then you start to add market segments like logistics spend or automation, you're just like painting a much bigger picture. And I think that's why those companies raised $100 million, not because their idea in procurement was better than your idea, it's because they're playing a broader thing. So we can move on, but I just wanted to add that in there.
No, it's a good point, and it's valid for the where do you invest in, because obviously you may start with a small proposition, but that proposition will evolve, and we see that when people move from sourcing to source to contract to P2P, and expanding their proposition as they grow, and therefore the market as well.
So what do investors look for? The first comment that I would make in broader B2B software and certainly in procurement over the last decade, is there are a lot of companies. So the volume of ProcureTech startups is very, very large, and there's only so many ideas or markets or subsegments that can be played if you think about it. You just break down like the procurement value chain. So being unique is important. I think a lot of these markets can support multiple winners, but that's a tougher pitch for an investor to rock onto if you were to say, okay, the P2P market, still, and I believe this to be true, is still very large and not digitized, and Ariba can get replaced all day long for the next 10 years, and someone's got to do that replacing. And there's mid-market and even like lower mid-market that don't have P2P and maybe need like a spend management solution. So you can just say, we're going to do what Coupa and Ariba do and do it better. I think that actually it's valid, but in terms of what investors look for, you need a unique thesis. Why are you different? How are you going to move faster than they moved? What's your thing? So being unique, and then clearly outlining why you, I think, is also important. What comes to mind on this bullet is the two types of founders in ProcureTech, which are tech founders and then procurement practitioners turned founder. And what I mean by that is there are certain scale-ups out there where the founders, I'll use the company Order as an example. Zach, the CEO there, has no procurement expertise. He is a very strong leader and strong in business, and did a ton of research on how his friend who owns a SoulCycle studio does his business purchasing, understood the pain points, and then developed what I know to be one of the only true procurement solutions for SMB, and has scaled that quite nicely, and then got into B2B payments. So that's just research, understand the problem, build a solution. You stumbled into ProcureTech. And then there are folks, I think Stefan is a good example, who've been in procurement their entire career and know all the pain points firsthand, are very well networked, et cetera. So those two kind of approaches have a different why you. One is, I know this market cold, I know it's massive, I've seen the pain point because I've worked with clients on the consulting side, and on the other end, it's I've done my research, we have early customer data points, I bring XYZ to the table, we have a strong technical co-founder, maybe we know payments really well, and not so much procurement, but the why you is really important. Unique strategy at a certain scale is also important. I don't think you have to go like overboard on being like unique. If you have, especially if you're showing proof points, like you have an outbound sales team that is really working, that's fine, show that it's working. But what is really interesting for investors, if you say, if you're Alvaro and you say, yeah, I have kick-ass go-to-market partnerships and they're kind of raining leads on our team, and it's really scalable and capital efficient, and we just crack the code on who the right partners are to get our solution out there, that's a unique strategy. The last two, or maybe I'll just skip to the last one because it's getting long in the tooth. Competitive positioning is a really interesting one. Investors, have grokked onto your, what is it called, like the competitive grid, where you're up in the right and everyone else is down to the left. I think being honest with like who you see out there, why you're different, and if you don't have competition, like really take the time to explain why you don't have competition, because an investor is going to really look into that on their own, and it's going to be something they factor into their diligence. So in terms of kind of competitive positioning, I would just say, be honest about it. It's better to actually outline your competitors like in your pitch deck, and really just drive home a conversation about why you're going to win and why you're different, as opposed to just write off competition or not even include it. I think markets that have competition are actually inherently more mature and thus less risky. If you don't have competition, and I'm an investor looking at your business, I'm going to say, well, is your idea just so new and nascent that it's going to take you 10 years, and the market will mature and there'll be other competition that comes in later on, because that sounds pretty risky versus oh, you have an amazing cloud-based spend analytics solution that's clearly better than your competition, and that market's been around for quite a long time and it's really large. That feels less risky, and I can understand why you're building it and why you're going to win, versus a new idea is a bit tougher to back. I'll pause there, happy for others to chime in.
What I'll do is I'll maybe jump Jack onto the panel session, which is a perfect place to kind of hand over to Alvaro or Stefan here to talk about what does a unique thesis and strategy look like. Stefan, perhaps maybe coming to you first here. What does unique look like? And it's not just Simfoni, by the way. But what are the core elements of being
others? Yeah. But just pick up on a couple of things from earlier. I thought Jack hit a lot of salient points, as did you. So first of all, right now, I think it's a really exciting time for all of us here, because there's so many gaps in current procurement tech, as you both said, you and Jack said. And there's a whole new world of opportunity that was probably previously closed. And also, I think companies are very open, like large companies are very open to looking at like new tech now. And of course, ProcureTech, Lance are also, helping with that as well to make it much more accessible and acceptable to do it, actually, like in vogue. So I think for all of us, this is a really exciting time, just contextually. Jumping into this in terms of the advice here, and as like Jack said, I've come from a more of a practitioner background, like super deep in procurement, super nerdy, if you like, and then coming into the sort of entrepreneur piece, I guess, later in the day, if you like, as opposed to the reverse scenario we gave. And both scenarios can work, by the way, in my experience. I think sometimes having a fresh perspective, certainly in procurement, can actually be, an advantage to a degree. But in terms of the advice I would probably offer, and I work with some other younger companies as well, is one, you get so deep, like us, we get so deep and maybe nerdy again in what we do, we can't quite see the wood for the trees, and we can't articulate our vision very clearly because we get so excited by our proposition, and we use 100 words when actually just 5 or 6 words are really what is needed for the investor, because they'll just time out after the first 60 seconds. So there's something about stepping back and like taking a more detached view from your company, from who you are and a sector. So take that helicopter view, maybe also get help from maybe other friends, family, people that are not quite as super deep in it as you, to actually kind of give you that wake-up call, and then really assess what value you're bringing to the market, to the customers, and why you are unique and different. I think, Jack, the other point you mentioned about being really ultra unique could probably be a bit scary for investors. I thought that was a good point as well. So not, no one else came up with this idea, really, in the last 20 years, so, it could happen, but it's a little bit novel. But then, yeah, articulating what impact you're going to make and how you can also ring fence your proposition. So you would call that a moat, so others can't, quickly replicate what you're doing. So having that detached view from the outside looking back in, which is really hard to do if you're so close to your, it's your baby, is really, really important. And just keep the messaging very simple, very clean, very clear. A couple of slides, get right to the point very early on about why you're unique and what problem you're solving, and then how you're going to protect that value proposition so it can't be copied. So it's that type of thinking, I think, will stand people in good stead.
Yeah. Alvaro, how about you?
Well, sometimes it's complicated, the thesis, because as you were mentioning before, there are some investors that are more generic or investing in different industries, and there are not that many that know about procurement. And in our case, it was I can give our example that I always had a thesis of product information management, that's what we do, a thesis of how product information management fits inside supply chain and procurement. And I was talking to many other investors, and nobody understood that, because normally product information management has been always in the e-commerce industry. When I talked with Jack and I was explaining the thesis about procurement and supply chain and how product information management can help, it was love at first sight. And the way of explaining it and I think this is a very good advice. I think it's a good advice here is try to use an example or similar industry, similar vertical, or also old versus new. And in our case was explaining how procurement today is like retail 10 years ago. Retailers were they were trying to compete against Amazon, and they were trying to turn their retail business into a marketplace business. And what they found is that their supplier base was not ready. So then Walmart and Target and all these big retailers had to look for solutions to help their suppliers to enable their catalogs and integrate their catalogs into their marketplaces, right? So this is exactly the same situation that procurement departments are trying to build their mini marketplaces using solutions like Simfoni, and they find that their supplier base might not be ready. And here's where we come to help, right? And that explains, once you get a little bit that idea that that's the gap that you could fix, then is when you have, because in the end it's about creating that initial interest, then that leads to a second meeting. Because in the end, the first meeting is about that tagline, that message, that idea that has to be incepted into the brain of the investor, that when goes back to the routine, remembers that that was interesting and I want to know more.
Yeah, and Jack, any particular advice you'd give? The second question about company looking to frame their competitive positioning. You mentioned a little bit before, but any particular advice? How people make that sharp?
Definitely. I'm going to sneak in one additional point in the back of Alvaro's, and then I'll answer the question. I think being very specific about the pain point and the value prop is such a good idea. In Alvaro's case, when he's thinking about supplier onboarding, he literally describes and shows the process that a P2P solution needs to go through to onboard a supplier. And it is literally like a 60-page document that you have to follow to get onto Ariba's catalog. And then it takes this amount of time, and it makes it feel so real. And it immediately, like, human beings and investors, like, simple-minded, like, you want to just digest the problem very simply. It's like, oh, yeah, there's real people that have to sift through 60-page documents and work with that EDI, and it takes time and money, and I can kind of see and feel that in international freight. Like, when we talk to founders that talk about like the bill of lading or the customs documentation or demurrage charges, like getting really specific about the industry and why it's an issue helps people grok onto why you're making that easier. So I just sneak that point in. And then on advice to frame competitive positioning, I think, yes, simple, digestible kind of differentiation and differences. I think founders, rightfully so, you don't want to put yourself in a box and oversimplify your amazing solution that has so many benefits and we're better in so many ways. But at the end of the day, I think you'll find more success if you say, we are the P2P that has the fastest time to onboarding and the lowest pricing. We'll come in at 40K and get you up and running in 7 days, and our solution works really well. Done. We are the PIM that focuses on B2B versus B2C. Everyone else focuses on that. Super simple.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'll pause there, but just keep it like there's usually 1-2 things tops that are like, this is why we win and why we're different. And it could be price, it could be a certain functionality, it could be the type of target customer segment you go after. And I would just leave it at that.
Okay, excellent. I'm going to keep us moving on as well. We've got a few more things to cover here. So, you talked a little bit about the proposition. Can we spend a little bit of time here, Jack? Hold on 2 seconds. Moving too quickly. Talking about how you create your sort of this competitive tension and look at things like your term sheets as well.
Yeah, if you can create competitive tension, that is one of the most powerful things you can do to raise money. I think, perception of how many investors are talking to you, and this is really shallow, but how many investors are talking to you, and we don't take a lot of calls, we get 100 calls a week, and we're taking your call, like we're not raising if you say you're 10 million in revenue growing 200%, but we're not raising right now, that will just invite a bunch of investors to be like, here's a term sheet, like let's try to do something. So it's a little bit shallow in game theory, but doing really well and being capital efficient, especially if you say, I don't need any money, we're growing and we're EBITDA positive and we're happy, and we don't see the need to take dilution. That's when you'll hear investors really try to lean in and figure out ways to put money into your company, do secondary, etc. And then competitive tension, obviously, just reinforcing that you get a lot of interest and you're being very selective, and then classic, once you get term sheets in hand, I'm not going to go through that, but you can create competitive tension with timing pressure and just fielding multiple offers at the same time. And then I'd say like laying out clear guidelines like that's important. Just like, hey, we're looking to get term sheets by this date and close by this date. That's just helpful. If you have a really good sales leader, it's not a bad idea to put them in front of the investor, or like a technical co-founder that's responsible for the AI or the just really is commercial and can walk through the product in an impressive way. We've talked to companies that have really strong CTOs, and when that's the case, you want to put them in front of investors. And then investing in the right relationships. There's another slide on this, I think, but you want to be talking to a decision maker, to a partner. You want to be meeting with more of the team. You want to probably know the investor for 6 months before they invest, and that's because it's a big decision, independent of price or competitive tension. You just really want to make sure you have a strong relationship before you take someone's capital and have to live with them for 5+ years. The right is a bit of a different topic, but I would just say, your business, where the body is laying, so to speak. So if you have consumption-based pricing or a bunch of churn or what have you, or like inconsistent like rep performance, I'd just be ready for it. Kind of like look at your business honestly and think about what the questions you're going to get and get out in front of those. Investors will arrive at those same conclusions and they'll ask for those things. So if you have customer concentration, say it on the first call. If you have a big churn, kind of weave it into, we would be growing 200% right now, but we had a big churn and now we're growing 100%. And this is why that churn happened and why it's not going to happen again. So I would just say, be upfront, be transparent, have the answers ready before people ask the questions is always a good rule of thumb.
Right. And then a build off the back of that, you talked about some of those questions that you're going to get, but maybe be good to call out a couple of key ones that you kind of maybe use yourself, or you get impressed when somebody answers it in the right way.
Yeah, 100%. So if we're talking pitch deck, I think the first thing we say is keep it very, very simple up front. There's actually a lot of template pitch decks out there that VCs put out. You can Google them. They're pretty good, and they're created by the people that evaluate your startup. So it's always a good idea to appease those people. You want to have a very clear thesis. The one I like to cite is a company called Pet Desk, where what they do is we do SaaS client communication for vet clinics. One sentence. What's our mission? We want to generate 1 million additional pet lives throughout our company history. And then the founder goes on to explain, this is how we're going to do that. We're going to bring more clients in, vets or pets are going to get more care. That's their mission. But what they do is the first thing they hit. I think that should be the right kind of order there. And then the classic kind of framework that we think about at PeakSpan, and I'm stealing from a colleague, but this person always explains the investment to their mother before they make it, and if they can't do that, they can't invest. And the framework is why this company and why this company in this market, or put in other words, in the right, why this market. And so I think in whatever order you want, why is your market interesting? Why should we be investing in the market? To put your company aside, let's convince the investor that you should be investing in tail spend procurement for these reasons: stats, proof points, big problem. And then, okay, we're done with that. Why you? Well, we take a managed approach where we're using our innovative technology plus our procurement professionals to drive the absolute best results. Because if you left it to chance, which other companies do, it's going to all go to shit because it's really, really hard. So we do a people plus software plus process plus payments technology approach to really nail the max possible savings. So it's why tail spend, and then why you is the right order. And then just lastly, on your approach, that's always the next question. Once you understand the product, the vision, the market, why you say, okay, like, well, what's a customer contract look like, and what's your sales cycle look like, and how are you going out there and signing these customers up? So being able to summarize very succinctly, well, the market opportunity is 100,000, mid-market companies globally, and we get a ton of inbound, and we also do outbound, and it's about 50-50, and this is our pipeline, and we can close deals in 2 calls, and we have a team of 10 reps, and we're just rocking and rolling, just describing how you approach the market. And then in here, you also see a lot of ICP, which is ideal customer profile. I would just also reinforce the 10,000 mid-market companies. Well, today we focus on biotech and healthcare. And we did that because when I was a consultant, those are the types of clients we work with. We know they're paying well. We have the best network. Those are large markets. We're starting there, and then we're going to expand. That type of specificity in the pitch deck will really help.
Okay, got you. I've got a question for you, and we'll save it to the next section here when we kind of go into winning in procurement. I mean, one of the things we're seeing is that there's a number of key themes that you need to bring out in that pitch. And what was interesting is when we were pulling the deck together here with Jackson, was the themes that he called out were very similar to key themes that we'd identified as well as being basically procurement priorities. And these were basically the results of a survey we just ran earlier this year as well into the top procurement priorities as well. But maybe I don't know, touch upon a little bit Jack or Jackson here. Some of the segmentation that you're looking at when you're looking at procurement's positioning here as well.
Absolutely. I can take it, Jackson. You can feel free to chime in. At a high level, we think about procurement in like 3, maybe call 4 core areas. One is if you have a specific, like, I don't want to say feature, but just you're a specialist in something like analytics or sourcing or supplier risk, for example. That's the specialist zone. And then to counter that, we obviously all know the P2P market. So the more suite players that just do everything, that's like the counterbalance to the focus solution. And then on the edges, we like to look at vertically focused from an ICP perspective. So procurement software for hotels. So you're always selling to a hotel, helping a hotel do their procurement. It's vertically focused. And then spend focused, you can put Simfoni in that camp with tail spend, but there's also just a lot of players that will do like SaaS buying or raw materials or internet infrastructure. food and bev, like just the type of spend being the only thing you focus on, marketing spend. So those would be the 4 areas I'd help out, Lance.
Okay, makes sense. And I think one of the things I've heard you say before, you know, when you look at the funding and the ambition of some of these procurement solutions, I think it's important to kind of call out and say, you've called this out before. Yes, everybody is ambitious and aspires to be a $1 billion plus company, but in reality, in the procurement space, it's okay to be, and I can't remember the figure you quoted, so Jack, you fill the space in you. It's okay to be a business that's worth 350 million or 250 million, because that might be big enough in the market you're in, and by the way, still be a very successful business as well.
Yes, the stat is for all of software. We looked at all the companies that were transacted at over 100 million. So only the successful companies, 90% of those M&A trade sales happen between 100 and 350.
There you go.
And only 1% happen over 500 million, and then 0.1% over $1 billion.
Yeah. Okay. Which calls a little bit back, Jackson, to your path. You know, the different organizations take different paths as they're going through the funding as well. Great. So we're going to jump back to the panel here and ask a couple of questions through to Alvaro and Stefan in particular. Stefan, maybe I'll go to you first here about what points should you keep, remove when you're putting your pitch together. You know, you've done this a few times, and as you said, you do advise a couple of companies as well on how they do this. But what would be your killer points?
I think putting yourself in the shoes, and this I'm talking like from experience here, because we've made mistakes or done different things and tried different things. We've had so many discussions with VCs and investors, like potential. There's so many people out there, and as you get more successful, those phone calls and emails come in every week. I probably get 3, 4, 5 maybe a week, something like that. It can be pretty. The volume of them can be a lot, and some of those could be big ones, others you've never heard of before, could be family funds or whatever. But I think you've got to put yourself in the shoes of the investor. So whether it's Jackson here or Jack, and think about what they're looking at. So again, don't get mega excited about what, obviously get excited about what you do. That's why you're doing it in the first place, but be measured about what they want to see, and think about that conversation about, okay, if you're pitching something, at the end of the day, you're both kind of selling each other to each other. So it's really about a marriage type thing here. So you're playing a dating game. That's how I would look at it. So think about what the investor's looking for. Do your research on them as well. I love what Jack said at the front end, because I know he's talking about us in terms of, we want to talk with people who actually know this space. They haven't just wandered into procurement by accident. I thought it was a great place to be. They've got to have done some deeper research in that area. It's like me going into HR or something like that and just, doing no research about it. So you've got to see what they want out of that conversation, and think of it as a two-way street, two-way conversation, in terms of what your proposition is for them, and how the key thing on here is about how technology feeds into this as well, how that makes you different. So the bit about technology is not just saying, oh, we've got generative AI and all this stuff. It's all the hot topic right now. It's all sexy stuff. But you can maybe use that as a frame, but then you've got to get into what it is specifically it does and how it adds value to the customer. And you've got to be, maybe with a couple of work example like Alvaro used, I thought was great. Maybe it's in a tangential sector, but how does it add value? How does it actually work? And how do you kind of ring fence and put a moat around it? And just keep that really succinct. A couple of slides. If you can't put it on a couple of slides, like you said, you can't pitch it to your mother or grandmother. They don't get it, then you kind of floundering. So that would be the lesson learned, I think, and less is more.
Agree 100% with Stefan. It's about telling a very strong story, and I consider the investment. I'm very aligned also with PeakSpan, the way they consider investment, because they're called PeakSpan because they consider investments as if you go hiking, you go from peak to peak. I normally use a different example that is a bit more graphic. If you've ever played Mario Bros, there's some levels that you need to jump from one mushroom to another mushroom. So basically, its fundraising state or its stage is one mushroom, right? So it's about, apart from a very strong story explaining look, this is how it went so far. Now we have this challenge. We need to jump from this mushroom to this other mushroom. This is the plan that we have. This is the money that we need, and this is how we are going to execute, right? Because the investors normally are specialized on each stage, right? And each stage is like one mushroom, and they know that if you don't execute and achieve these milestones, you won't be ready to then go for the next fundraising or M&A event, right? Where you will be qualified with this specific checklist, and you then it's game over because you are not, you didn't jump well enough, right? And you go over the cliff. And then it's about, okay, how it went so far, how are we going to do it now, and who is the team behind it, and explain why it's going to be relevant and why it's strong, or where are the people that you are trying to bring on board. And then one tip for the key tech themes, I would say that investors in general, they love tailwinds. They love that, okay, this is an industry that is growing. This is a technology that is growing. If the company is in the space, okay, if they execute well, the tailwind is going to help them. So I think positioning your company and your technologies inside these tailwinds is a good strategy to get the attention of investors.
Yeah. And Jack and Jackson, I had a quick question for you. I read something recently about one investment firm that had used Gen AI to replicate the pitch decks of a number of different solutions, and they put the Gen AI generated deck in front and the one that was the normal deck to a bunch of investors, and basically the investors actually favored the one that was created via Gen AI. It was a pretty hefty difference in terms of their stats. Now, whether or not you believe in it or not, how do founders and basically entrepreneurs differentiate themselves, so that they're not Gen AI'd out when it comes to the pitch deck?
I think using Gen AI to the extent you can incorporate it into your pitch materials, you don't have to, but there's, I guess the point there is that there's a lot of tools out there that help generate content and beautiful presentations like Canva and other animations and stuff, and so the bar is raised on all content. And I think if you can get familiar and use these types of tools and AI to generate your content, that's just going to bring you up to the new bar.
Right, I'm going to keep this moving here as well. So we've got the next section. We're talking about a few different things. First thing was we're talking about the kind of the pros and also the cons of investing into this space. And we've touched upon a few of these already, Jack, but maybe just summarizing the pros and cons, and again, calling out the things that you see as being key about the market.
Yep, 100%. So in the left side, I have mentioned the payments opportunity. Procurement obviously touches B2B payments quite closely. And so if you can position your scale up to potentially capture some of that, or at least help facilitate it, that is great. And that is a huge positive. And on the slide that Jackson presented, there are companies like Ramp and Airbase that help with the actual payments, and the very valuable companies. Coupa has their Coupa Pay, and there's plenty of others. So payments is huge. Procurement, again, is now being positioned as a more not siloed, not one functional group, not just selling a tool to the CPO type solution. And people understand that it's compliant, secure buying, where maybe you're also driving cost savings. And that can now exist in multiple modalities that touch all employees or purchasers. And so it's enterprise-wide, and it might be integrated with contracts as well. So it's getting wider. That's a plus for procurement, because otherwise sometimes procurement is marginalized. And thought of as like secondary to the office of the CFO. So that's a good thing. I think we're still early. Take that comment for what you will, but I think we're still in for 10 plus years of penetration and digitization. There's definitely more technology out there that's helping all of software get easier to build and be utilized, just APIs and things that people can do now with data and Gen AI as discussed. And on the right, there's a lot of companies out there, usually having already probably played the idea that you have. I don't think number 2 is necessarily accurate, but it certainly is on people's minds. Like, why would I play the sourcing market if Scout RFP was the big success there, or P2P? Like, why would I back another P2P if there's already a bunch that are big and doing well? And the third bullet is very important for the types of investors that procurement attracts. There are some that get lots of funding where you're shooting for big outcomes. I would say about half of those have worked out, half are TBD. But TBD, on how many ideas can support $1 billion outcome. If it can't, that kind of negates a lot of the VC community. Not all, but like some VCs will only back you if you can generate $1 billion outcome. So just keep that in mind. And that's, kind of a con in some people's minds. They'd rather play B2B payments just generally, which can be $1 billion outcome. The last 2 bullets are the bullets. It gives me the most cause, are things that I focus on, which is selling to procurement is hard, sales cycles are long. Have you proven that you actually cracked that nut, or have you, gotten lucky with your first couple of customers, or used your relationships to do that? Just scalable, repeatable go-to-market, especially in enterprise, is very elusive for ProcureTech. And then adoption is difficult as well. It's sticky once you get in. That could be on the pro side, high gross retention. But I would just say that process of selling and implementing and getting going is just still super hard. And that's a thing that's on investors' minds.
I think linked to that, and we talked this a little bit before the call in the green room, as it were. In the current climate, does that give a different perspective as well when it's, if you look at these potential challenges in the current climate, how does that make you look at the markets? And, if somebody comes to you for funding, do you look at it slightly differently in the current market?
I think abstracting that question up just one layer, to talk about the market a little bit. I think the interesting thing, and also in the green room, we talked about runway, and as Alvaro puts it, the oxygen of scale-ups. In this ProcureTech space, I think there are companies that have high velocity that need capital to extend runway and keep going, keep getting bigger, and that's exciting. I don't think that's everyone's experience. I think there's some markets that are a bit more slow moving. They're still very exciting, still very large, but it's not necessarily an overnight success story where you're going from 0 to 10 in a year. And so in terms of funding, the key question for both sides, because you don't need to raise capital if you can be profitable, you have unlimited oxygen. The key question is, do we have strong enough product market fit and demand pull from our customer segment that necessitates high growth and capital injection? And if you can see that and feel that, then amazing. Like, funding is easy. You're growing a couple 100%. You're looking to double the sales team. The market's large, which is usually not a problem. The market's usually large in ProcureTech. If you're signing a logo a quarter and still getting that go-to-market motion going, maybe now is not the time to take 10 million of dilution or whatever the number is. Maybe it's the time to stay profitable and figure that out. And then once you sign 5 logos a quarter and you're like, oh, geez, I'm starving for resource and I don't have implementation managers. And like, if I had one more salesperson, I would have enough leads to feed them right away. When you start feeling that, intensity, like you need capital, that's the time to raise. Not when the sales cycle is super long and you're still kind of signing your first couple of customers.
And the last couple of points here to come to the sort of the top of the hour is around raising capital. Any common steps? I think you talked a little bit about that when we were talking about when and how much, but what else would you consider?
Yeah, happy to jump in and kick us off here. I realize this the list of more than a few bullets on the left is pretty daunting. It makes it look like raising capital is a hard journey, which it is, as you can see from the ProcureTech 100 we listed. There's some interesting stats on the right here mentioning, lack of funding is why startups fail. It mentions the total number of unicorns. I might even redirect us to the comment that Jack and Alvaro were talking about in the green room prior, which is really just running out of cash is a big reason why startups fail. And there's a corresponding dynamic there, which is, are you trying to grow too fast than you need to get to your vision of success? So if you look at these bullets on the left, I think there's a few common themes here. One big one is just, what is your vision and expectations for success? I'll drill on that in a little bit, and then I'll let Jack come in over the top. Some of the other big things are presentation, competitive differentiation. We've talked a lot about those today. And then the last one, which you can see in these kind of like last 3 bullet points, which we have a full slide on this, is investor fit and this idea of like reverse diligence. So circling back to vision and expectations, I think a big point here is just asking yourself the question of what is success to you? Success might be, reaching 5 million ARR this year. It might be growing 300%, or it might be growing 50%. Thinking about what your successful exit outcome is, because that's going to feed into what is a positive relationship with your investor, and helping you align around the actual exit outcome you'll hopefully secure in time. Another big point here is just like, do you have a targeted view of product market fit? That's going to really just circle back. Can you position yourself to, I think Jack mentioned it, but can you explain what you do to your mom or grandma or friend that has no idea what procurement is? If you can't explain what your company does in a minute or two, or a couple slides, then it means that your investor probably won't really understand what's going on there either. Big thing here is that as we saw on the ProcureTech 100 list, there's a lot of well-funded incumbent horizontal solutions that are already doing, I wouldn't call it an amazing or great job, but they're doing a good job at servicing the needs of a few different industries. So there's a big opportunity in terms of having a focused ICP, knowing the pain points of your primary customer set stone cold, and having a product that does an amazing job of servicing the needs of those folks. I think I'll let Jack jump in and hit some of the points around differentiation and investor fit.
Amazing. Super helpful, Jackson. I think you covered it well, and we covered investor fit on a prior slide, so I'm happy to keep driving, Lance.
How much, the $10 million question, how much should you raise? And we touched a little bit upon that as well, but any key things here to consider?
Yeah, I think we have touched on a lot of these points. A lot of this is going to be unique to and you can see it on the left, your sector, the macro environment, your competitive intensity. I think the most important call out here is your cash need and desired runway. Basically, when you're raising capital, what's your current burn rate? How many more months do you have in terms of your own runway? If you're raising a 5 or 10 million round, how does that align with your expected burn moving forward in terms of investor alignment? Are they going to push you to burn faster than you need to get to that next view of success? We talk all about, if you're ever in a back and forth kind of like pitch selling with PeakSpan, we talk all about peak 1, which basically just means that when we're investing at 3 to 5 million ARR, how do you get to 20 million? And I think it's just important to have a tangible view of the steps required to get there, and then what is success at the end of the journey. If you're raising with the expectation that you're going to need to raise again in 6 to 12 months, are you going to raise from the same investor? How does that feed into your actual needs? One other point I'll call out here is primary and secondary capital. At PeakSpan, we're big fans of secondary. I think, especially in the early stages of a founder's journey, let's call it less than 20 million a raise or so, you might have a lot of net worth tied up in the business. big fans of taking some chips off the table, and depending on who you're working with as an investor, it can be a great way to help them get in their desired check size while potentially, minimizing the dilution you're taking up front. And then, I think we've hit most of these top 4 or 5 bullet points. Valuation and terms, I think a lot of it will be dictated by the market. Depending if it's, a hot market, you might want to pull around forward and raise more now at a higher valuation. If you think that, the company will be valued more in 12 to 18 months due to your own internal dynamics or due to where you think the market might be, it might be worth raising less upfront now, minimizing dilution in order to increase your optionality looking forward. But a lot of that will just be kind of based on your own confidence and goals, whether you'll meet a plan, and kind of just like how you think the company will be doing moving forward.
So the last area we're going to cover before we got the final panel here was just managing those relationships, and the importance of kind of managing the pipeline. Just flipping a little bit here to Alvaro, I just thought I'd bring you in because you kind of, when we're doing some of the prep before this, kind of called out that pipeline as being quite critical. So it'd be good to get your thoughts on managing the investor pipeline.
Yeah, probably startups, when we enter into scale-up mode, we see pipelines everywhere, right? Everything can be solved with a pipeline or can be seen as a pipeline. And I think with raising capital is the same. You need to open pipeline and talk to as many investors as possible, but then qualify very well what are the right ones and the ones that know about your industry and that are investing in your stage, that have the money. Sometimes there are investors that don't have the money yet, and maybe it's not the right time, or the fund is a young fund or is an older fund, all these kind of things. And then once you engage with the right handful of investors, then it's about engaging and having in mind that this is going to be a very long-term relationship for both parts. So it's about knowing if it's going to be the right fit or not. And I think by talking to 100 investors, you will end up filtering, or considering 100 investors, you will end up with 20 first calls. Then you will end up with 7 or 8 qualified relationships. Yeah. And if at the very end, you end up with 1 term sheet, so job done. If you end up with 2, 3, 4, 5 term sheets, amazing. Then you can select what is the best fit in terms of investor profile and also terms for the investment. And this and also timing is very important, right? All these conversations should happen at the same time. So there's a little bit of planning that has to be. Some conversations might go faster than others. So all this timing, all this knowing how it works, the fundraising as a process and as a funnel, I think is really, really important to master that as a startup founder, because we have to raise several times in the startup history.
Yeah, and Stefan, you mentioned a couple of points earlier on about the reason why you decided to work more closely with PeakSpan, but were there any little nuances as well that you kind of picked up from that whole process?
I quite like Jack's comment on this slide here at the bottom. It was about that kind of human touch, the empathy, and which I think is incredibly lacking. In fact, I was quite shocked, being newer to this, coming from more of a practitioner perspective. Some of these companies, I'm just talking generically, I won't name them, maybe I'll name them later, but they go straight into the numbers. And these could be really young guys talking to people, I've done this for a long time. And then they go straight into the numbers, etc. They forget the human piece and what we're trying to build, and even the success we've had already. And it shocked me in a way. I find I get quite affronted by it. So I think the human piece around it should not be undervalued. I think it is undervalued, and there should be more. Obviously, numbers and everything else are really important. Like I mentioned earlier, it's about, it's kind of a marriage, this thing here. So it's got to be right for both parties. It's got to be equal. It's not just them or you. But I think that bit is really, really important, because you're going to be having conversations, board meetings, other things with these people, and you need to respect each other and value their inputs. I think that is incredibly important. So I like Jack's comment at the bottom of this slide.
Yeah, if I can say something here, it's going to be a 5 to 10 year relationship minimum, right? And sometimes I tell my co-founder's wife something that is a way to piss her off a lot, is I tell her, look, I have more papers signed with your husband than you do, right? And she gets very pissed off because it's right? So I think with investors is the same. They're going to be partners in the company. There's going to be liabilities together. There's going to be a lot of board meetings. There's going to be a lot of conversations, very good ones and also very hard ones. And I agree 100% with Stefan and Jack. Relationships matter a lot, and people matter a lot. And it's all about trust also, right? And also working with people that you don't like. Wow, that makes things much harder.
Yeah, it does.
One other quick point, last point I'll add here,
Yes.
Lance. I think we briefly mentioned it earlier, but obviously these are a lot of questions to ask yourself, and they're all very key questions. It's tougher to get an answer if you're trying to do this all over, let's call it a 1 month period or 2 month period when you're talking to 20 to 25 different investors, which is why at PeakSpan, we really recommend that you try to have a relationship with your prospective investors 6 to 12, 18 months prior to an actual partnership. You're going to have a better idea of the personality fit, what the product is they're offering, and really just like what it's like to work with them, as opposed to getting to the finish line when it's coming. You might have a bid date, it's coming down to a week or so, and you're really having a tough time comparing investors on anything other than the terms they're offering or maybe their high level reputation. Such that I would say if you have the time and if it doesn't distract from the business too much, it could be as simple as quarterly updates or just a call every half year or so. It's worth it to engage with your potential investors up front to really get a better idea of the answer to these questions here on the left. Yeah,
great. I completely agree. So just to wrap everything together here, the next sort of 5-10 minutes. We've touched upon some of the behavior, Stefan, a little bit already, and same with you, Alvaro. Is there any kind of experiences that when you or early indicators of where an investor wasn't the right fit? I think you did give a couple of examples, Stefan, there, where somebody just doesn't dive straight to the numbers, basically doesn't take the time to understand. But any other sort of gems or red flags that you could maybe share with the audience here?
So there is that. I think or we get wise to it within the first 60 seconds if they dive straight into that, and if they're trying to drive the agenda with a lack of empathy. I pick it up literally probably in 20 seconds. Okay, I can read them. I've done it now. So I think sharing that agenda around the mutual introductions, and normally they're finding you. It depends obviously what you're doing and what stage, but these days people find us. We do virtually no outbound. So ask, but also you can tell. I always do a little bit of stalking, find out who that person is, check their background, how senior they are, because you get normally a lot of juniors are out there doing the field work, which is fine. That's a valuable role. So check out who you're speaking to, and if it is a junior, then that's a short meeting that they're qualifying you as well. And then very quickly you want to then get to someone probably of a partner or whoever it may be, and just respect the game they're playing as well. I'm okay with that. So I think you get wise to it very quickly, and don't lose your working week because you're busy anyway. So you've got to be careful with your time.
I agree. I'm aligned with Stefan here. Talking to investors can be, if we don't do it the right way, can be also a time waster, and also can be a way of losing focus on the business, because sometimes there are people in VC firms that their job is to talk to entrepreneurs, to startups. Sometimes startups are completely aligned and sometimes not that aligned, right? So agree with what was mentioned. It's about figuring out very quickly if it's really interesting or not, the conversation, and also the email that is sent. Is it a generic email that they are sending to you that they are interested, or they have a thesis behind, right? I remember the email, that the way that I engaged with Jack is because Jack specifically sent me an email. He was very senior inside PeakSpan already, and he sent me an email that I could have written, because the kind of things that he was saying were super right. They were specific about our industry, and I knew it was written by someone that knew about the industry. And then you get other emails that are super generic, that are about, oh, we love what you do. Because we've seen that in LinkedIn, that it is amazing what we do. We invest in similar startups, and maybe the startups have nothing to do with what we do. So maybe that could be a good sign that that conversation could be a time-wasting activity, right?
Okay, got you. Great. Now, I'm just going to open the floor here to any questions from the audience. I do have one question here, which come from Nicholas Frank, which is goes back to some of the conversations about pre-revenue startups and investment levels that people are prepared to put in there as well. Nicholas asks what are your views on single founder startups versus multi-founder ones?
I have an answer, but I think we're not the best position to answer that question. I know if you Google that question, other VCs have stated publicly perspectives. And I think those perspectives are that pre-revenue startup VCs say they like two plus founders. I think that's the consensus out there.
Yeah.
I would only agree, like, it doesn't matter if your metrics are good in the growth stage, no one cares. But I would just add, there's kind of a hidden hack in that if you have 2 to 3 people that are very strong operators and they're all bought in 33% of the business, and one's technical and one's sales and one's the CEO, those are 2 hires that you might not have to make. Those are super hard hires to make. So there's like some good built-in benefit of having 3 founders with different areas of expertise.
Then another quick questions come in here from Kathleen as well, which is basically saying, do you have any specific thoughts on sustainable procurement as a segment, and I guess how it's growing, the investments in that area?
I don't know how specific my thoughts are, but definitely a growing segment, definitely one that people care about. Being able to generate data and analytics on sustainable procurement has been key. It's a well-funded, increasingly well-funded segment, and so I think folks are generally bullish on that segment.
What I would say, what we see is it's still incredibly fragmented, and so there is on the buy side from the procurement function. Whilst we thought there would be a significant amount of growth in that area last year, there wasn't. Procurement organizations seem to be looking to prioritize and understand how they were addressing sustainable procurement first before starting to make commitments on software to support their own programs. So for me, there's been a little bit of a slower ramp up in the demand for solutions. Yes, there's exceptions, but in the main, it's been slower. I think as well, there's a lot more fragmentation, whether it's on the vertical around particular industries or particular areas of spend as well, which mean that it's a little bit harder for people to piece the different elements together. So yeah, I think there'll be growth, but it's just the market's just been a little bit slower in terms of demand in that area as well. Cool. So just to wrap up here, it'd be great to get a few final words from each of you on what are the most important considerations for raising capital. We've had a great conversation around all of the different elements of raising capital over the last hour, but it'd be, as I say, fabulous to get the panel's point of view on what's the most important thing to do. So I'll start with you, Alvaro, if it's okay.
Yeah, well, thank you. It has been a pleasure to be in this webinar. I think people matter think about this as a process. Don't take it also personal. There's a lot of rejections in fundraising, but it's just a process. And if you try to be objective about that, rejections are common in sales, and this is kind of similar. And also don't lose focus on execution. Fundraising is a full-time job that you have to perform while you are doing another full-time job that is running a company. Yeah, fundraising is hard. Just stay focused, and people matter.
Excellent. Thanks. Stefan?
I would always counsel people to prove the traction first and not go straight out to raise money. This is my own personal view, because I think you're better positioned when you've proven something. It may not be the biggest thing in the world, and it's really hard when you're doing it as a bootstrapped enterprise, which we were, for example. So you don't have to go running out trying to raise millions, unless it's you're trying to raise millions to solve a massive problem straight off the bat. But I think most cases you can probably get some traction first, particularly if you believe in what you do, and then you can prove that concept to say, you won your first 1 or 2 customers. I think it then greases the tracks or the rails for that fundraising discussion. So I would probably implore people to get some traction first, get some runs on the board, maybe not the biggest ones. You'll also learn from that a lot as well. And then you can tune your story when you're doing the fundraising piece. So I would always counsel people, as I say, to get your first wins first on the board without going straight out to raise money, unless there's a particular reason why you got to raise money to solve a huge problem.
I guess I'll kind of go on that point a little further, playing devil's advocate here as an investor. I would say don't just raise capital for the sake of raising capital. Every company's journey is going to be different. Oftentimes, waiting a little bit, as long as you have the runway to do so, whether that's time in the market, whether that's, getting product market fit, like Stefan said, it might just, be the right decision to raise a little bit less, or kind of wait till you raise a larger round. And then the other point I'll make is that don't let solely the market or what an external investor is telling you dictate how you want to approach raising capital and the partnership. Really think about what your goals are, how you want to get to the next measure of success. And then as you kind of consider who the right investor might be, trust your gut. In a perfect world, and hopefully this happens 9 times out of 10, an investor is going to understand where you are today, your vision, how you get to the next step in the journey. And they should be able to pitch the business back to you and really be aligned with that first measure of success. One thing that we like to say at PeakSpan, which goes on the point that Alvaro made about the papers, is that it's almost harder to get out of a financing partnership than it is to get divorced. So it's really important to align and just partner with someone that you like to work with, but is also aligned with how you see the business moving forward.
Brilliant. Thanks very much. And then finally, Jack, to you.
To be honest, a lot of my points were already taken, but so this might just be a regurgitation. I would just keep in mind that venture capital and capital in general is a product. There's obviously the partner and a lot of benefit to that, but if we're talking about just, do I need cash? Just remember that that's a product and it's not a fit for everyone. And just because it sounds cool and great to raise money and other peers are raising money, it might not be right for you. It might not be your situation. And the example I'll give in like growth capital space is that if you're growing really fast, capital can be an excellent accelerator and can generate lots of enterprise value. If you're not growing fast, then I'd question why you're looking to take on dilution and instead, work on putting a little more proof points and getting your growth to accelerate and then going back out to the market. So yeah, I just keep that in mind. It's not necessarily a fit for everyone, and it's usually a better fit if you have the growth to justify the dilution. Well,
guys, it's been a fantastic hour and a half. We covered a lot of ground, a lot of great points here. I like this summary here as well, and they putting yourself in the shoes of the investor, taking advantage of tailwinds, managing the funnel, and some of the sort of the red flags to watch out for. So thanks so much for your time. Thanks to everybody who's been on the call as well. We will be sharing this recording and the white paper and blogs, as we've mentioned before. And for those of you that managed to make it, great. If there's others that you think would be interested in finding out, then please feel free to share the blog and the contacts, and or contact any of the panelists directly as well. So again, thanks so much for your time, and look forward to speaking to you all again soon.